Welcome, everybody, to the American Space Museum. I'm Mark Marquette. We're so glad you're with us today to stay curious. And a lot of you like this guest today, Terry White. Hello, Terry White.
Hey, how we doing?
I'm good, good. Of course, Terry, for what you gave, how many years of your life to the shuttle program?
34.
34 years. And become a great friend of the museum and a weekly contributor or monthly contributor on our Stay Curious program here. Now for a better part of over 2 years. And Terry, thanks for spending your time, and people out there love you coming on, and we'll have a bunch of questions for you today. But we're going to talk about, we're going to kind of isolate different parts of the shuttle over some of Terry's next visits. And we're going to talk about the chin, the chinny chin chin. Is this what our green screen is that my colleague Marty Winkle chose?
Yeah.
That's the chin, huh?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I ran across some great pictures that I set aside in some of our collection that referred to the chin. I said, Terry, could you talk about that today? So we are, and you're going to learn a little bit about a part of the shuttle that, well, where is it on here, Terry?
Okay. Well, it's not
Just
on this.
introduce us
It's
a little
not
bit.
on this model. So, the chin is an area that's just behind the actual nose cap, which is reinforced carbon, and it fills an area between the nose cap and the leading edge of the nose landing gear door.
All right. He's
Okay.
going to tell us why that's so important, what it was made of, and
Yeah.
things like that going on there. So let's do a couple little house cleaning chores here where we want to thank Nick Thomas for being on yesterday. Nick talked about the 3 Mercury flights in the month of May.
Okay.
Shepard Suborbital, which of course made him the famous and the most coveted slot of those Mercury astronauts. And then that was May 5th. May 15th was Gordon Cooper.
Yep.
And May 21st was Scott Carpenter doing 3 orbits after Glenn did. But you know what I like thinking about? Cooper was my favorite Mercury astronaut for some reason. Did you have a favorite?
Not really. No.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We were so young. You didn't have a Mercury. You were the Gemini astronauts. Interesting to think about Cooper, the last American to fly solo
Yeah.
in
after
space.
that, yeah.
Okay, and he was also the first astronaut to orbit the Earth twice. Of course, Gus Grissom's suborbital and his commanded JT-3 made him the first American to go to space twice. So check that out with Nick Thomas. He did a great job. Everybody, thank you all for watching us. Telling your friends to like and share. Tomorrow we're going to have Mayor Andrew Connors on for about 20-some minutes. And then Marty and I have to go to our board meeting. Marty's on the board of directors there. That's why my job's secure. Thank you, Marty. You know, he's been an awesome supporter of this museum for 25 years. Marty used to do a lot of runs, not 8K, 5K runs. How many carat runs?
Well, the one for the museum was an 8K.
Yeah, you did many, and raised a lot of money for this museum over the years. And now he's a board member. And, of course, Marty and I have been doing this show for 5 years together. And you believe that?
Yeah, it's hard to believe.
He still talks to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're what?
Sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes.
Just remember, he's got a mute button over there. He can turn you off.
And he does. But no, we've had an awesome time. Over 1,270 shows. And we've had a lot of fun doing it, but you know, it's very meaningful, Terry.
Yes.
You have had people coming about you being on this show, and what keeps you coming back?
Well, the fact that I get to share stories from out at the Space Center that people have never heard. All of my family that watch it, the next day they'll contact me and they'll say, well, you never told us that before. You never told us it, you know, and I said, well, you never asked. So
Yeah, we hear that a lot about all of our guests, Marty, is people will come on here and say, my family watched it, and they said, we didn't know you did all that. And they go, well, I tried to explain it to you, but you were too busy telling me about school or
Yeah.
or the soap opera you were watching or whatever at the time. So
Yeah. Travis is over in Poland still, and
is he?
yeah, he's planning on watching it today with some of the other members of the Army that's over there with him. So a shout out to Travis and company.
Great guy, and yes, you got all your family watching today. Gary Allgaier's watching. He was teasing you on his show that uh, you get bigger numbers because all your family watching it.
They do like to
Out
watch it.
there. And we're not obsessed with the numbers watching it. We're obsessed with the quality of you out there. Excellent minds, very knowledgeable people.
And your questions.
That's right. Dave Stangy's on board. Tommy Usiak. RG Jubilee's become part of our social hour here every afternoon. Hello to you, Steve Jokins. I'll get that package off to you tonight, I promise you. And there's Man Space, Mitch Rothman from Western Colorado. Robert Laws, he's 9 o'clock at night in Dundee, Scotland. Gary Gerald, Dean Babcock, and there's Travis from Poland. Hey, young man, thank you for doing all you're doing. And Lynn Feathers there from West Virginia. And Carlton Bailey is up there watching us from his wildlife preserve there.
Yep.
So thank you all for checking our shows out this week, Thursday, Friday. We got to get some backyard stargazing in there, of course. Got a couple happy birthdays, and I believe I left my pictures on the desk. Let me go get those, Terry. Well, I'm stalling here.
All right. Well, I can always say hello to my daughter Rebecca and her 4 kids, and say hello to my wife Patty and my sister Lori. Lori watches the show all the time, but she hasn't figured out a way to send her questions in.
All right. All right, Marty, I'm going to go down here. We hadn't done this in a while. Marty and I are talking about doing some old school, and I want you to zoom in on today's birthdays, Marty. As I had 2 board meetings today with our Flag and Memorial Committee at Titusville, and then with our Titusville Area Visitors Council. So would you zoom in on this picture here? And while we wish a happy birthday to 74-year-old Tom Akers and 61-year-old Paul Richards there. There we are, old school style, folks. The way Marty and I did it years and years ago. He's got a green school board behind him there. That's interesting. Tom Akers. Take the top off there, Marty, if you would please. He was born May 20th in St. Louis, Missouri. Okay, so he no doubt heard at his age there, 74 now, born in 1851. Thomas Dale Akers, 4-time shuttle man, okay, twice on Endeavor and then once on Discovery Atlantis. Got 30 days in space. He famously was one of 6 pairs of hands that grabbed that Intelsat on the maiden flight of Endeavor, STS-49. You remember that?
Yes, I do. The only time we ever put 3 astronauts out on a spacewalk at one time.
We'll ask you about that in a minute as we say hi to Paul Richards. Happy birthday to him. And born in Pennsylvania there, UCX, in Dunmore, graduate of Dunmore High School. And he did a lot more, obviously, as an astronaut. 1 shuttle flight, 102 Discovery, and he performed a spacewalk on that. And so we wish him makes him 50, he's 61. He's 61, and Akers is 74. Today's date, May 20th. Boy, the month of May slid by quick, I'll tell you that. Thanks, Marty, for that. Old school, it helped me from having to load up more pictures and do a briefly thing there. And we're going to show a couple other pictures here in a minute as Terry talks about different parts of the space shuttle. And Jim McDade. Hey, thank you, Jim McDade, watching from Rocket City, Huntsville there. He's a big social media commenter on things. And Bill Whiting says hi. Terry, thank you for continually sharing your shuttle experience and memories with us. It is very much appreciated. And Tom Celentano agrees. And we've got, I feel that special, something about the green screen. He's RG Jubilee. He likes the astronaut birthdays, and we do too. They're in our communities doing great things. Have any dealings directly with Mr. Akers or Paul Richards in your?
With Tom, I did.
Did you?
Yeah, it was on a Saturday, and I was walking by the operations desk, and
Oh yes, I love this story.
yeah, and there's a guy standing there, and he sees I have an Endeavor hat on, and it was STS-49. We're getting Endeavor ready for its first flight, and he goes, "Hey," he says, "where'd you get that hat?" And I explained to him that one of our engineers owned a store just outside the Space Center that sold hats, T-shirts, and all kinds of space items. So I explained to him where he could go get it, and he says, "Well, I can't get there." I said, "Wait a minute. How'd you get to work today?" And he says, "I flew in on a T-38. And I said, well, who are you? And he pointed up to the mission patch right there, and he says, "That's me, Tom Akers." And I said, "Okay." So I took him to my office and showed him where I would have the hats, and he picked out what he wanted in the way of hats and that. And yeah, and interesting enough, he looked, and at that time I chewed tobacco, and he looked, and there was a pouch of tobacco on my desk, and he says, "I chew, but I'm not allowed to bring it because I'm flying in a T-38, and they don't want me chewing in the aircraft." He says, "So can I borrow a chew?" I said, "Sure, but don't take it in the bay." So
Interesting. Now, what kind of chew did Terry White have? Do you think there is it? Redman or maybe Levi or I'd say
Redman.
Redman. I was going to go to Skull even
Yeah,
on there.
nope, no, none of that dipping. It was just pure leaf tobacco.
All
So.
right. Well, there's something didn't know about you, Terry. And they allowed chewing tobacco.
Well, you weren't supposed to chew in the high bay.
Okay.
So yeah, no tobacco products in the high bay.
All right. Okay.
I didn't always take it out of my mouth when I went in. I would just keep my mouth closed.
Right, there you go. And cough or like spitting into a handkerchief.
I carried a special little spit bottle.
That's too much information there. Okay. All right. Yeah, Terry's got answer any question that you have about the shuttle program. We're proud that he is such an ambassador still for the shuttle program. Endeavor, we did a big deal about it last week, was launched the month of May, our May shuttles, Terry. The maiden flight of Endeavor 49 was flown. May 5th or 6th, I think it was launched. And the final flight of Endeavor was flown in May.
Okay.
And we launched that that final launch, Terry, 14 years ago. So what do you think about when I tell you that? 14 years ago was STS-134 launched.
Seems like it was yesterday, but then by the same token, it seems like it was a long time ago.
And what was the feeling of the workforce
When they announced it?
I mean, when did it really hit you? When it launched and it was gone and coming back? Hopefully,
No,
or
when I walked it in from the runway, after the last flight, brought it in, and it was still parked outside, but because we had to change out spacecraft operators and that, and had to do a few other things before we actually took it inside the hangar. But then, my day was over. It'd been a long day, and to go home and knowing when I came back in tomorrow, I was unemployed.
wow, who's going to disassemble it and everything?
We still kept people to disassemble it, and that,
Okay.
but we didn't need near the workforce to take it apart.
But
and
you
make
weren't
it
going to be
safe.
part of that by
No.
choice, or?
No, not. I wasn't selected to be part of it.
Oh, okay. Well, that probably saved him a lot of money.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
I didn't play golf.
Okay. Oh, okay. Yes, everybody needs money. Yeah.
So
Huh. Yeah, that's interesting. I probing a little bit there. We've not talked about that. Mothballing these orbiters had to be, an emotional and financial.
yeah,
I'm not going to say trauma. It was trauma to some people.
And part of it, they just canceled the Constellation program. So we were looking at it as some people would stay working on the orbiters, getting them safe, and the majority of the workforce would shift over to, especially the younger folks, shift over to working the Constellation. But since they canceled it, they went, "Oh, wait a minute, now we're not going to need a bunch of people. So
Hmm.
it went to just the crew necessary. So
Well, let's get off that subject and talk about when this orbiter flew mighty and high. And we're looking at obviously Atlantis at the beautiful Atlantis building at Kennedy Space Center Visitors Complex. Marty, you've got a question?
We have two questions. Robert Law is asking, is there a date for the Titusville Memorial Service at Flag? So we'll be back.
Yes, it'll be the last Sunday of January. Terry's always been at it. The last Sunday of January will be in 2027. So, 2026. I've not looked and seen what that date is.
But maybe is the question, is there a ceremony for Memorial Day, which is coming up?
No.
Oh, okay.
It's the flag.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I think he means the astronaut
He meant
memorial.
that, yeah.
Okay.
It's at
You got it
Sandpoint
right.
Park.
You
Yeah,
got it right.
Sandpoint Park. No, we've got Monday. I got 2 Monday events to attend as part of our Flag and Memorial Committee. So we celebrate that here in America. And then you've got another question, Marty.
Michael Bruno, he says, is one off-topic question. When the bipod ramp was eliminated, would you say the foam impact issue was basically solved?
No. And I argued since STS-1 when I was picking pieces of foam out of the tiles and that, but I always got the answer, well, it's not coming from the tank and that. But yeah, so they had thought they resolved the bipod issue on a couple of different times, and they changed the type of foam that they were putting on it. They tried other things to stop it, but in my eyes and talking to the guys that actually did the work, they should have installed heaters to eliminate the icing instead of the installation.
Marty, I see some other great questions there. Why don't you take that over?
Okay, got a question from Jim McDade. Terry, what was your initial reaction when you saw the missing tiles on Columbia after STS-1 landed?
Well, when we saw it, we actually knew some of them were missing because they picked it up on launch. We picked up a couple of pieces of tile out on the launch pad and that, so we knew, yeah, and we knew we hadn't hardened all of the tiles on the vehicle. I explained in a previous show about how we had to go take the tiles off of Columbia when it got here from California and actually harden them to make sure they would stay on. But it had over 32,000 tiles on it, and we did not get them all hardened, but we got all of them on the lower surface and the majority on the upper surface, but we did not get all of the tile replaced. So we lost tiles forward of the windows, we lost tiles along the vertical, the orbital maneuvering pods, which the astronauts could see those from space were missing. Yeah, they could see that those were missing off the orbital maneuvering pods and that. So, but those are the lower temperature areas where the white tile are. So it did not overtemp the structure. We still had a lot of work to do, but initially they thought it was going to be a problem, but when it came back, everything was just fine. The insulation underneath it did its job, and we didn't have any overtemps. So,
what does that mean, harden the tile?
Okay, well, the tile material is soft, the LI 900, before they coat and fire it. So where the coating and firing gets done, it is harder, but the bottom of the tile, the surface that we actually bond a pad to and then bond the pad to the skin of the ship, is soft. So if you pulled it in this mode, it was pretty strong, but if you got a corner of it and peeled the pad, it would peel right off. So that was an issue that they didn't figure out until we had Columbia here. So was the reason, one of the reasons why it took 2 more years after it got to Kennedy Space Center before we actually ready to fly, because we had to harden the tiles.
And Mark, we have 2 more questions.
Sure, yes.
Gary Gerald's asking, Terry, while in the OPF, what power source was used to keep the orbiter powered up?
What power source was used in the OPFs?
Yeah, well, we had ground power and it connected through the T0 umbilical in the aft of the vehicle. So we ran all the power in from basically facility power, but we ran in our hydraulics for our hydraulic pumpers to operate all the hydraulic surfaces while we were doing testing and that for them and check out. So yeah, it was all plumbed into the facility to provide all that. Now, initially, when we came in from the runway, it was powered by a huge truck that provided all of that power, air conditioning, everything. If you look at the trip in from the runway, you'll see a big truck with 3 huge, basically orange hoses attached to it. That's supplying the air conditioning, the breathing air to the aft, to the payload bay, and especially the crew module, where we still had 2 spacecraft operators in there operating the systems and that. But yeah, so, and then once we got into the orbiter processing facility and we got the orbiter up to what we call maintenance height, then we would disconnect that external and hook it up to actually the facility power, air conditioning, etc.
Okay, Mark, we have a question from Travis.
Yeah, your son's got a question.
What were the things you didn't give an astronaut after they returned to Earth, and why?
He knows something.
What didn't you give an astronaut when they got back to
And
space?
why?
Oh, well, one of the things I would give is the female astronauts. I'd give them a hug when they got back. But there's a lot of things that they couldn't do. But I don't know exactly what you're asking. but yeah, they weren't allowed to walk around by themselves. They had to walk with somebody because they were constantly getting their land legs back underneath them, especially if they'd been in space for any length of time. But I don't know. Can you clarify the question a little bit?
Maybe he will there. I've heard more than one astronaut comment that even a couple days after they came back from a flight, they just let go of a can of soda or something, and it just dropped down, and they forgot that they...
Yeah, I asked Tim Copra what surprised him most when he got back, and he said he came out of the vehicle, went into the special van where they got to get cleaned up and get a shower and get clean clothes on that before they came down. They gave him time to get their land legs back underneath them, but he said somebody handed him his clean clothes and he was holding them waiting for his turn, and someone else asked him a question and he just turned loose of his clothes and turned around, because up in space they would stay right there till he turned back, but here on Earth they hit the floor and went, oh crap, gravity.
Tim Cooper, that's a good story.
Yep. So at any rate, when you asked about the soft material on the tile, this is the OML, the outer mold line of the tiles. This is
forward there a little bit.
This is the bottom. And if you look, when I run my thumb across it right there, which you can see I've done multiple times, see the material? It just came right off on my thumb. You can wipe it off with your fingers and
Like
that.
chalk.
Yeah, yeah. So the pad that was glued on there would basically, it's glued on there. You could just take the corner of it and peel it right off. Once we'd hardened it, you could not get it off.
No, he's done with it. You got something else you're bringing up? Marty's ready to zoom in on us there, old school.
Okay.
Right?
Well, here's one that's been hardened. This is the bottom of another tile. It happens to be the thinnest one off the ship. But after we hardened it, it turned gray. And it's called densification. Okay. And then once we glued the pad on to a densified tile, you couldn't get it off. This one I had to skive off with a razor knife to get the pad off of the bottom of this tile.
And that pad's called Frizzy?
No, the pad is
Frizzy's in the middle, in between.
Well, no, Frizzy is the one that's in the really low temperature areas, less than 700 degrees. But it's the same, basically, as the Frizzy. It's a Nomex felt, yeah, and it's coated with room temperature vulcanizing, called RTV adhesive in that, and we glue it to the back of the tile. It'd be cut exactly to the dimensions we need for this tile. And then when we glue the tile to the ship, we put the glue on the ship, and it contacts this side, and we put it under pressure, and then leave it until it cures hard enough. But that still provides flexibility. So this doesn't overstress the vehicle, and it doesn't overstress the tile. If you bonded the tile directly to the aluminum skin of the ship or the other composites and all that, you would actually snap the tile when the vehicle needed to flex, expand, and contract. And this allows it to flex. So basically, I could go out there and move all the tiles on the ship. They don't move much, but you go out there and get them and move them. And
That's amazing.
Yep.
Just a little bit of a shake to them. You, what was the adhesive?
Room temperature vulcanizing silicone adhesive. So basically, it's, if you've ever done any work with Form-A-Gasket or similar to the caulking that you would use around your windows, that different formulas, but still it's the basic a rubberized adhesive. And room temperature vulcanizing means it cures at room temperature. You don't have to heat it or anything to get it to cure.
What does NASA OPF consider room temperature?
68 degrees.
68
We
degrees.
kept the OPF 68 degrees.
Woo! See, that's why I asked.
Yeah, the
Dave
ladies.
Stangy's going, my heat bill can't
Yeah,
afford that
the-
up in Michigan there. My
the ladies didn't like
72,
it, but
my
no,
air
yeah,
conditioning bill, I
yeah,
mean.
yeah, but no, nope. The ladies always wore jackets and sweaters and that. But
You know, I've seen a lot of pictures of y'all, and nobody's Florida shorts and
well, no shorts are allowed in
no
the
short-
building. So,
okay.
yeah,
but
no.
a lot of long sleeve shirts I see in a lot of
Yep.
areas
Yeah.
because of the tight.
yeah,
Stuff in
because
there.
we kept it cold, and then the different protective equipment you have to put on, so for different jobs.
All right, Marty, go ahead with another question on that UCAC family microphone.
Christopher Waits is asking, why were Columbia's wings marking different from most of its life until 2001, when it finally got updated with its name on the right wing?
Well, when
Great
they first came
observation.
out with the markings for the vehicle and that, and they had them in certain locations. Later on, they didn't explain to me why they wanted, but they wanted markings changed, and then we changed from the NASA emblem of the I forget what they call, but the one that's spelled out like letters, and went back.
Worm.
Yeah, the worm, and then went back to the NASA meatball. So we had to go change all that out, and then and we used a paint called VHT, very high temperature.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's referring to the chine on Columbia, though, the black.
Well, if it's a chine,
whatever one has, you want to
chine, but it had
here, it's
it
black.
had the chine its entire life.
Yes,
So, yeah.
yes.
So yeah, that was right prior to rolling out of the orbit processing facility for STS-1. They came down with a requirement. They wanted that upper area painted black. And we could never figure out, and they said because they're worried about the extreme heat on the underside of the wing, and that thin area of the wing was going to get hot, that the temperature differential between the upper wing and the lower wing could cause problems. So they wanted us to paint it black so that just prior to re-entry, they'd roll it toward the sun, heat up that area on the upper part of the wing, because the black would attract the heat, and then that way it would come back in and they wouldn't have a problem. Once it landed, they realized it wasn't a problem, so we didn't paint any of the other orbiters.
And you can spot that now that you know on all the pictures and stuff. Marty's got a question from a new Stay Curious watcher, Alexander Manderbach from Rio de Janeiro,
A good one.
as in Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, go ahead, Marty.
What was the most demanding task for the ground crew after the shuttle returned?
Well, the initial demanding task was to make sure it was even safe to get around. It's sitting out there on the runway, but they got to go around in special. They look like astronauts walking around in their protective suits, but they have to walk around and sample all the areas where there could potentially be a hazardous commodity leaking in that, and check it out, make sure it was safe, and then set up huge fans to start cooling the orbiter down while it's sitting out there, and then we could get the rest of the crew to come around and start working on it and start hooking up, like I say, the ground support, the AC and that, and start taking off panels where we needed to open things, and then getting it so people could start actually walking around underneath the orbiter and looking at it.
Thank you for your questions there. Amy Collins was wondering what that OPF cooling bill was.
Yeah, and one of the other things was getting the hatch open and getting the astronauts out once it was safe, and putting spacecraft operators in there to continue operating the vehicle because it was still powered up, and then start getting off any live animals that were on board, any live experiments, and then getting as much out of the crew module out of the way as we could while we're out on the runway while they're doing other tasks on the vehicle. So
a lot of scientists anxious to get their hands on their experiments up there, and I'm sure that was a little thing to manage there. Marty, go ahead.
Okay, we got 3 more questions, Mark. So
Sure.
far. Okay, Tom Usiak is asking, Terry, the 2 senators from Texas want to move Discovery from Uthar-Hazy to Houston. With no 747 flights worthy seems like a near impossible scenario. What do you think of this?
he's right. It is near impossible if you don't have a vehicle capable of mounting the orbiter on top of it to take it down there. And I don't know if they retain things like the tail cone. that we put on the orbiter, because otherwise it was disrupting the tail of the 747, potentially making it very difficult to fly the 747. So that's why that huge fixture was put over the engines on the orbiter for a ferry flight. But there's a barge that they built to take a model of an orbiter around the country up the Mississippi and that, but I don't think you could take it to Houston, and there's a lot of power lines and trees that have to come down when you tow it down the highway.
Bitter Houston workers that they don't have an orbiter for sure in there. Go ahead, Marty.
Okay, Gary Gerald is asking, what was the thickness of the windscreen and how difficult was it to change them out?
It was extremely difficult. We only were changing out the outer pane, but the window assembly is actually made, the 6 primary windows, of 3 different panes. There's an inner pane, there's a center pane, and then there's an outer pane. And for damages incurred in flight, and that we would have to replace the outer pane. For a while, we would replace 50% of the windows after each flight, because the slightest little we replaced windows because they got hit with a paint chip in orbit. So and we learned that it was the weakest part of the structure on the vehicle was the windows.
And I just read just this week, matter of fact, that each paint thickness is 3/4 of an inch.
Yes. Yep. So we thought that on Atlantis's flight, where they got something wedged between the inner pane and the structure, that if we had to take all that assembly out, that would have ended Atlantis's career. They wouldn't have gone through all the work to put it all back together. But by doing a bunch of things here on the ground, trying multiple ways to get that, finally got the structure inside there to expand enough that item moved. So they grabbed it and pulled it out. So I forget what it was, but it was stuck on the window pane, and they weren't in between the window pane and the structure. So,
well, that's another program we can do at Terry. Look at all the windows there and pictures of some of the damage, not just paint chips from spacecraft going up in space that blew up, particularly booster stages.
Yeah. But we used to spend hours, technicians hours, just laying on their belly up there with special pads, polishing the windows because they would get hazed in flight. And we found out by directing the thrusters a certain way on the boosters, it minimized the amount. But we were replacing windows. It would polish for weeks, seemed like, and then they'd still say, okay, we got to replace it. We can't get the haze off of it.
Marty's got another question or two there.
Or 5.
All right.
I think the show's turning into a Q&A session.
Yeah.
Where'd the last one go? Wait a minute. Oh, what was the bipod ramp Michael Bruno was referring to?
Okay, that's the area
We don't have an
up
ET.
at the top of the external tank that actually mates to the bottom of the orbiter in the forward section. Okay, and there's 2. Well, they're bipods, but they're 2 arms that come down and actually fasten to the tank, and they come up to a fixture that fastens to the forward ET bearing plate, a 2-inch diameter bolt. So, and then the other 2 attach points are back at the external tank doors.
Okay, another
And I'm not an external tank guy, so I can't explain a whole lot about the ramping to the bipod.
Ready for the next? Okay, Christopher Waits is asking, do you know of what special preparations were needed for Columbia for STS-118, which was her next mission after 107 and would have been her first to the ISS?
Well, in my understanding, Columbia was never going to go to the ISS. It wasn't configured to go to the ISS. I don't know weight-wise what it was, but, it didn't have the external airlock system to mate with the Russian fixture on it to mate to that. So all of our missions for Columbia were scientific missions and not going to space station.
Okay, next, from Mark Isiak, why didn't they use the tail-mounted camera on all orbiters?
The tail-mounted camera, the one at the top of the vertical?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Silts pod camera. Yeah, they only use it on Columbia. They didn't use it very often, and then they decided they weren't getting what they needed out of it. But I never understood. That's one of those things that our job was to install it, put the TPS on it and that. Our job wasn't to figure out what it's doing. So
I'm with Mark. You think that'd be logical to keep an eye on the EVAs
yeah.
and all kinds of things, all the things you'd learn that you don't, know what's going
Well,
on.
you got
but-
cameras all through the payload bay to keep an eye on them. So
yeah,
and
but it's a high little perch there.
well,
for
the
some-
camera under that robotic arm took good pictures.
There you go. That's why he's the expert there. You got your answer there, Mark Usiak. And another question.
Okay, Jim McDade is asking, what was the strangest thing that your team ever found inside or outside of the orbiter post-flight?
Okay, outside of the orbiter was probably bigger chunks of space debris. We expected to find micrometeorites and that, and what turns out, we were finding more space debris. I pulled out chunks of circuit board the size of a quarter, and you could tell obviously it was a circuit board, and different things that impacted on the outside. Insect strikes, before they got high enough up in the atmosphere, they would be buried into the tiles and that. But inside the orbiter, we found tools that floated around in space and came out from places that no one admitted they were there. I mean, that we had a very tight tool control program here at Kennedy Space Center, not in the beginning, but after a couple of processing flows we did. But and Palmdale did a lot of work in that building them, but we found tools out there that were part of original build that weren't from here, and no one ever declared that they had lost that and it was still inside there. But they had ants inside the orbiter. We found pieces of food inside the orbiter that were not crew related food. So
Well, Marty, I just want to comment. Nick Deacon is watching from West Midlands, England, in the United Kingdom.
been there.
Got to meet you, Terry, a couple times during Shuttlefest weekend there. So, which was a pretty mega event all the way around there. So, Nick, I think I remember meeting you also. But he's got a question there, Marty, as I was going down to it.
He's asking, do any of the remaining orbiters have original engines?
Well, we changed engines all the time, and I don't know about the original engines from STS-1. I don't know that, we flew engines over and over again. So, yeah. And so I got the rest of Travis's question that he asked earlier about the astronauts. One things you don't hand an astronaut once they get back from space. I talked about Tim Copra and the clothes, and he just turned around and they fell in that. You don't hand a recently flown astronaut a baby. It's just, you don't do it because you never think of, especially you think of somebody that's been up there for 3 or 4 months is used to turning stuff loose, not going anywhere.
Yeah.
So just, it's an unconscious thing, but it's just understood as don't ask a recently flown astronaut to hold a baby.
Good advice. You don't want that baby bouncing off the floor, apparently, there. So, yeah, well, great questions being asked. Like Dean Babcock said, that's what we're here for with Space Workers, Marty and Terry White here. I've learned so much. It's incredible. You all learned so much. And tell your friends to like us and share us. We've got a whole backlog of almost 1,000 episodes now on YouTube alone. We started on Facebook. And we've not changed much, have we, Marty? We've stayed true to the shuttle program, getting our first guests for shuttle workers and Apollo workers. So we're very, very happy for you all there. Let's talk a little bit about the chin, like I promised you all there. We were going to talk about the chin of the shuttle. Here it is on Atlantis.
I don't know if you want to zoom in on this or not, but yeah. So this is a
Let me put this over here. Oh, you're going to point to it.
yeah. This is a photograph of the tiles
Here's
on
my bottom of my American flag.
on the lower forward, okay? And this is the nose cap itself. This is prior to the chin panel. And then the first row of tiles behind the nose cap are the VO70, that's indicating orbiter, but the 399415.
Terry, try and point it down because you're getting a glare of.
Okay, assembly, is that better?
Yep.
Yep.
It's showing backwards. I don't understand that. Anyway.
I don't know. But at any rate, so that is one of the hottest areas on re-entry.
No, it's not.
Okay, and then just below that, these are the ones that back up to them, and then that's okay. Then right down here, that's the opening for the nose landing gear door. So there's only 2 rows of tile on the vehicle between the nose cap and the landing gear door. And like I say, they're the hottest areas, them and the leading, just behind the leading edge of the wing, and the tiles are over 4 inches thick. So they do see the most heat. They see 2,300 degrees. Well, we actually had burn throughs where it melted the corner of the tile and the heat got all the way down to the structure and damaged the aluminum. Luckily, it didn't go any further than that.
Early in the program, how many shuttles?
Well, we changed out and first flew a chin panel on the 38th flight of the Space Shuttle program, and it was STS-35. Flew the first chin panel in that. But what we had to do was go take this area right here, and we had to, here, let me change. We had to take on the orbiter and cast the area right behind the nose cap.
There you go.
And then once we made a cast of that, then we sent it out, and it took a month to fabricate a reinforced carbon panel to replace that 2 rows of tile. And on this one, you can see right across there is replace those 2 rows of tile that I was holding up a minute ago, because there's the nose landing gear door. So that's what replaced all of this right here, is that panel right there. It's called the chin panel.
So it's RCS like the wingtips.
Reinforced carbon, yes, and it will withstand 3,000 degrees on reentry. Now, on the first flight of a chin panel, they did discover some issues with the glazing that's on the outside, but they deemed it still acceptable to continue flying, so we continue to fly that chin panel.
There is another different view of it
Yep.
there. Up there.
So it was mechanically fastened. It wasn't glued on. The nose cap, the leading edge of the wing, and the reinforced carbon chin panel are all mechanically fastened.
Meaning
nuts
bolts
and
and
bolts.
nuts and
Yes,
nuts and
yes,
bolts on
inside,
there.
and then all kinds of insulation backing them up.
How are they tempered for the heat?
Well, they're inside, so they're not seeing the heat. But a lot of people
Yeah.
don't realize it. In the center of the nose cap inside is a panel that has 8 tiles on it, in case any heat translated through the nose cap, that they had the center of the
Yes.
structure was backed up by
We
8
did a
tiles.
program on the nose cap
Yeah.
1 or 2 times ago.
But
and
but,
this is what
but then there's over 500 of these blankets that are installed for insulation inside the nose cap. So those are all machine sewn and but basically handmade. So
and what's inside of them? Like a
that is
batting.
yeah, it's aluminum batting. So
Aluminum batting.
Alumina batting to
Aluminum.
withstand the heat. So
How many degrees?
I don't know what the blankets on the inside saw, but on the outside the blankets stood up to 1,200 degrees.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. Looking at the
See,
numbers there.
the only time we would have to do anything with them is if we were taking off a nose cap, because nose caps had certain number of mission life, and then we would replace it with a new one. So
I was looking at the number there. Something we've learned on this show. A shuttle part begins with VO.
7.0. Yep.
And what does the VO stand for?
I'll tell you that the next one because I don't remember. But
Vehicle.
vehicle
object.
Yeah, but then it's
vehicle.
number.
That's too
number
logical.
7 differentiates something else in the way of its
Yeah.
part number scheme. So yeah, and again, it's part of the assembly. The 399 is part of the assembly for that first row of tiles behind the nose cap. Now,
Every tile has a specific number of placement.
yep.
And Terry's got a pretty good memory. He can tell you where it's at if just by the shape and looking at it. What are these anomalies on the bottom there, Terry?
Those are all damages to the tile and that, so you can see that area
You got another picture there you want to show.
takes a beating on the tile and that. Well, this is just showing you the edge of the nose landing gear door. So
Here,
these,
set it in there for stability
Yeah.
there.
so
Here, if
you
he
know,
sets it down there,
yeah,
I think Marty can. Oh wait, there you go, Marty. I'll set it right there.
yeah, we got to lean a little bit more so
Yeah.
it doesn't get much clear.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's
I got
just
it.
showing the tiles that are actually bonded on the door, and this happens to be at the aft edge of the door. So at the forward edge of the door, the tiles are 4 inches thick. By the time you get back to the aft edge of the door,
Which
they're
door?
the nose landing gear doors.
Oh,
They're
oh.
just down to a little over an inch thick.
And we're going to talk about the tires and the landing gear next time. I found some cool pictures to set aside as we find this with interest in there. Let's see, you got a couple. Well, let's see here. I'm going to forego that what
Okay.
we talked about there because we've had a great time here with Terry. I think there's a couple other questions there. Uh, let's see, Steve Jokem's comments. The left wing leading edge RCC was impacted by a chunk of foam off the tank during descent. They were able to duplicate the impact during tests at Langley as part of the investigation. Yes. And they're just commenting to themselves there. But Skyscape Paradise. What do you think a Shuttle 2.0 could have been like? The design didn't really have a chance to be iterated upon, and if the funding had been there, what changes would you have liked to seen most? I like that question because Skyscape Paradise, they admitted at the end of the program, after 135 launches, it was still an experimental craft.
And that's right. Yeah. It was supposed to go out of the experimental phase after the first 5 flights,
Yeah.
but we were constantly doing upgrades and doing different tests and that all the way through it. But the orbiters were actually flying very well in the last few years, and that we had very few issues with them. But in my eyes, if you're going to build a replacement, I would make it interchangeable so you have a plug and play concept, so you're not messing around with a bunch of payloads and that. But a lot of it was mission funding. Once you funded a thing, then everything came out of that budget for this and that. But a lot of payloads weren't interchangeable from one vehicle to the other. Tip that over a little bit more, because you had to put all of the different fixtures in that supported that payload. So if this payload turns out it wasn't ready to go fly, you couldn't just take it out and at the pad and stick another payload in, because none of the supporting structure was there. So, to build something like that made it interchangeable from one to the other.
I'm going to show this one last frame there, Marty, but you got another question there. Yes, we didn't properly answer Skyscape's question there. Point being, the money for the shuttle was approved in 1972 for $4.5 billion with the B dollars. That's $45 billion in today's money, 50 years later. So it's still a lot of money, about 5 times NASA's budget at the time. And the drawing boards were 50 years ago when this thing was on the drawing boards.
In pencil.
That's right. No CAD drawings or anything like that. So what is a great angle for Skyscrape here is you start now, 50 years later, what do you think this would look like?
I have no idea. They asked me 20 years ago what I thought it would cost to build an updated orbiter, very similar to this, and I had no concept, and they wanted to know what it would cost to build new OPFs, and I said no. I said there's a lot of things I could tell you to build it better, but the concept, even though I worked on a lot of stuff, modifications to the building and modifications to the orbiter and that, I didn't have to write the checks.
Mm-hmm. Well, the basic design is a good one. The Delta wing was tried and true, just like how the Apollo command module, the Boeing looks just like it. You know, the Crew Dragon, is a little more streamlined a little bit, but the same concept there.
The X-37 and that looks similar to the same type of design because it worked.
But what I think could be a big change there, Skyscape, is having engines on it that it was intended to have, so it could land and do a passover if it had to on there. You could probably, today's technology, fit some engines in the wing, like I'll show you a blueprint one time that I have on my screensaver.
But just remember,
it has engines on the right in this area here.
Yeah, I've seen some that had engines out on the wings.
Yeah.
It also had the orbiter maneuvering system out on the wingtips. But then you've got to do a lot of changes to the wing, and the engines to power it around when it's down in the atmosphere. That's more weight. That's weight you don't need for space, but you need for that. So you're carrying all that weight, and every time you add more things like that, you're taking away your payload capacity.
Well, what great questions you all have. I know with all of our guests, Marty, that are regulars, we can just basically turn the camera on and take your questions. And because they're so smart and so good out there, we got the best space geek community, bar none, out there.
But
I don't
Lynn,
care about your numbers. We go for the quality.
yeah,
And,
but Lynn didn't ask her questions she said she was going to ask.
what's that?
She didn't tell me. She said, I got a couple of questions for you, but I didn't see them come up.
Lynn
So,
Feathers?
yeah.
Marty, go ahead, buddy. You got a question or two
A
there.
question from Amy Collins. In hindsight, would it have been cheaper to have gone with titanium skin over the cost of tiles, blankets, and so on?
They did look at titanium panels that they put on that they could take on and off, and I don't remember the reason why, but when they analyzed all the different processes and different insulations and that, they stuck with the tile.
I'm not kidding. There's my screensaver, which John Tribe loaned me, this blueprint that has engines on the wings there, right in this area right there is a wing mounted on there. And I don't think I've shown that or put that on Facebook before because I wanted to know exactly the way John wanted to talk about that. So, yeah, all kinds of concepts going on there. Marty, anything else we've got a question on over there as I bring back up the program here?
Looks like for right now we're caught up.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Well, tell you what, one final thought from Terry here. I told him I'd throw an image up there and just occasionally ask him, what do you think about when you see this?
Looking down inside the payload bay, yeah, and it's getting ready to put a payload in it. But in our world, or at least in my world, even as mid-body manager, and I knew the name of a payload we were going to put in, but we never saw the payload. They were built elsewhere. They were processed through the payload processing facility. They were put on a special vehicle and brought up to the orbiter processing facility when we had all the interfaces ready to install them. And then after we did a inspection on that, brought inside the bay, made sure they were clean enough to even go inside the orbiter. So there were times we got foreign payloads that we would not allow them to put them inside because they weren't clean enough. So when a payload was getting ready to be installed, we still didn't know exactly what that payload was going to do because our work was to get the vehicle ready and not the payload. So, and especially with the Department of Defense payloads, we really had to limit the number of people that got around them. So,
the noise level.
It was noisy, especially in the early days because we had our hydraulic pumpers were actually inside the building. So when they brought up those pumpers, it was like you're standing in a train station with 3 or 4 trains barreling by. I mean, it was really noisy. But they finally got smart and moved the pumpers outside, so that lowered the noise level. But it's a big hangar, and when there's work going on, there's all kinds of noises associated with it. And one of the things that used to make people cringe was the drills for repairing the tiles. We used actual dental drills with diamond bits to do the repairs on the tiles. And you would see people when they would just cringe and walk out of the bay when 3 or 4 of those dental drills powered up.
Awesome. Got a couple other good comments there. Tommy Usiak was thinking about the 2.0 version of the shuttle, and he says it should have a escape system, survivable escape system during ascent and descent in the atmosphere. And Michael Sullivan, thank you for joining us. And this is a question I think we all have, Marty. I always thought it was crazy that each tile was a unique shape.
Well, it has
Why is that?
It has to match what we call the outer mold line of the vehicle. So it actually has to exactly match, for stress reasons, the structure that it's going to be glued on. Okay, there can be no deviations for the majority of them greater than 19 thousandths of an inch. And for the really critical ones, no deviations greater than 5/1000ths of an inch. So it has to exactly match the structure that is going on, and then it has to match the outer mold line you want of the vehicle to have a smooth flow of the air across the vehicle so that you don't overtemp the vehicle. So you have those two things, the bottom and the top of the tile have to exactly match it. And then they have to match the curvature that you want on the outside of the vehicle. They have to match the location. And the Russians learned from theirs. I don't think they use 6" by 6", but the majority of the tile on the vehicle is 6" by 6" on the lower surface. On Columbia, where there was a lot of white tile up top, they were 8" by 8". But that's all for stress reasons and to allow the vehicle to flex, expand, and contract. Next time you're flying on a commercial airliner, look out over the wing and see how much movement that wing's doing. This is going a whole lot faster, a whole lot more thrust behind it, so the vehicle really shakes, rattles, and rolls. And if you didn't have a way to eliminate that stress and to allow those tiles to move, you would basically lose a vehicle. So,
Glad you asked there, Nick Deacon. A couple more questions there we'll take, Marty. Got a getaway special question.
I'm trying to find it.
Jay Brad. We also had getaway specials. They must be a space worker. Explain a getaway special. By the way, Lynn Feather is stumped. She says I couldn't find a question to ask.
Thanks. The getaway specials were smaller payloads. A lot of them were in a fixture that was basically about the size of a 55-gallon drum that we would install down in there. And it can have a multitude of different kinds, but they were funded by companies, by universities and that wanted to send experiments. So it was a package deal. It was a kind of an add-on thing in there to put extra things in there. One, to get more money for NASA. Two, to take the maximum number of payloads to space. Some of the payloads we carried were not even the size, half the size of a shoebox. I mean, they were really small satellites and that. But a getaway special could be whatever that university wanted to do. What they got to space, they opened up the canister and launched the payload out of there. And
there's a little bit of the wiring.
Yeah, and all we ever knew was we called it a getaway special. Exactly what it was going to do, we never tracked. Yeah, over 200 miles of extremely fragile wiring inside the vehicle.
And Gary Allgaier talked about the one tray at the top and bottom are for the avionics and whatever. The shuttle in the middle here that's not filled in yet would be where the electrical connections for the getaway specials and other things would be in there.
Yep.
Marty, go ahead. One of our final, and there's another. What are you thinking about when you look at
all
that?
the tubing in there? Yes.
Just amazing. Every bend and turn and position has a reason for being there. And as you keep reminding me, redundancy throughout the vehicle.
We found out that after a wiring issue where one almost shorted through is that we had the primary and backup wiring running through the same area alongside the payload bay, and that was a no-no. So we had to go in there and do all the wiring associated with taking one of the whole assemblies out and moving it to the other side of the payload bay. So that if there was an impact to one side, we would still have the backup.
And another final note here, Marty, go ahead. Which Christopher Watts was alluding to STS-93 in the wiring problem. Yes, we'll certainly tackle that again. Go ahead.
My comment, it looks like Jay Bratt and Amy Collins may be former space workers. You may want to have them try and contact you and maybe join us on Stay Curious.
Yeah, well, we brought Jay Baratti.
Right.
Oh, Bratt. Okay.
B-R-A-T.
Yeah. Okay. No. Well, we brought Jay Baratti in. He did a show a couple months ago.
Yes.
Yeah. So I got to twist his arm to come back again because he enjoyed it. So yeah, he wanted to come back to you and talk about the overhead cranes.
Oh,
he was a crane operator before
we
I
didn't get him
hired him to be
and he knows
TPS tech. Yeah.
Right. Dan McCune, our maintenance guy here. Yeah. So, yes, we caught our breath after Shuttle Fest 4 and got time to book guests and doing some great things. And we're going to work on getting that Google Meets working so we can bring people in around the world like Alex Carl and some other people. So thank you all for watching there. Appreciate it there. Jay Bratt says, this is me. Oh, that is him.
Oh.
Yeah, like
Okay.
I guess Marty told you that.
Yeah.
So we're welcome to have you there in another Stay Curious episode. Hope that you can enjoy this program today. Want to remind you to go back and look at Nick Thomas's great program. And tomorrow we're going to have Titusville Mayor Andrew Connors on and talk about his support of Spaceview Park. And there's a movement to have an international monument built up there, which
Okay.
people in the shuttle era would still qualify for that. Wow, look at all these people watching today. Let's see, we won't include the family members here, so, but Doug Forrest watching, Dave Stangy and Strange and Scary watching, Skyscape Paradise, Robert Mecklenburg, he's in the Netherlands, okay, he's watching.
And is it Michael Collins is watching?
Yeah, Michael Collins from the grave. Alexander Manderbach, thank you from Rio de Janeiro. You read some more of these going up there. Thank you.
Christopher Watts, yeah. Amy Cullen, Nick Deacon, that's the West Midland one. Yeah, I've been there before. Michael
England.
Bruno, Blean,
Elena
Elena,
she's in
Adekara.
South Africa, we think.
okay. Jim McDade, Bill Whiting, Tom Salatano, and Lynn again, Travis, my son, Dean Babcock, Gary Gerald, Robert Law, Mitch Rothman, Steve J, RG Jubilee, Tom Busiak, and Dave Stangy.
There you
Jay
go.
Barati, Cliff Watson, and I don't know who HVN is, but they're watching.
And good morning to you, Cliffy. How is Wednesday in Pomona, Australia there? And now you've heard Terry White say your name out there in cyber world up here. And we're grateful for you, Terry, a lot. Thank you so much. I know you have fun. Like you said, it's a way to connect.
Yes.
And Terry also a huge help with Shuttle Fest. And it has turned into the Love Fest, like Space Fest
Yep.
that we wanted it to
You
be.
got to meet a lot of the people whose names I called out on this list today.
That's right, absolutely. And been in contact with Joe T quite a bit. All right, Joe Tanner
Yeah.
really likes our museum, and what a great guy he is. So be seeing some of these astronauts at the Hall of Fame induction next weekend, and we'll get them committed. Several of them committed to come to Shuttle Fest 5. So already looking forward to what you can bring to it next time, Terry. So thank you all for watching this episode of Stay Curious. Marty, thank you for a great Streamlabs job there. Anything to button up over there?
No, it looks like we're all buttoned.
Great. And a big thank you with your
Yes,
tender
sir.
hand there, my friend. Thank you so much. What can you say? One of the great American achievements is this little puppy right here.
Yes, it is.
And I'm so proud that to know you and that you want to share with us this type of program. So until tomorrow with Titusville Mayor Andrew Connors, I'm Mark Marquette on behalf of the American Space Museum, thanking you for watching and saying we can't wait to see you in our museum to bridge the space between us.